And welcome to In-Game Chat for Saturday, August 12th, 2017. It's Season 11, Episode 31. I'm Scott.
I'm Sarah.
Hello. Well, if you'd like to get in touch with us, I mean, we've got a phone number, but I don't know that we're going to be taking very many calls today. We have a lot of music to play. 2729228 is the number. Go to ingamechat.net for all the links to get in touch with us. You can find us on Twitter at InGameChat. You can find us on Facebook. You can email us, everyone, at ingamechat.net. We are streaming right now on Twitch. So go to twitch.tv, search bar, type in In-Game Chat, and you'll be able to find us and watch the show live while we broadcast and join in the chat room with everybody else as well. You know, most of the shows when we do our unboxings of loot crates and things, I say, hey, it's much better to watch. Well, this is one of those episodes where it's going to be much better just to listen, to have this on and while you're doing whatever else, just because this is all going to be audio. For this episode, and only the second time in the 10 years plus that we have been doing this, we're not going to be talking about the news of the week or what we played or what we've seen. This one is all about the music. We've got 19 tracks lined up for this episode. We might get to all of them. I can't promise you that. We're going to get to the important ones, though, your requests, basically, and the tracks of our guests as well. We're going to be playing some of our favorite tracks, some of your favorite tracks that you sent in to us this past week. And we're also going to be talking with two composers. In the second hour, we'll speak with Jason Graves. That is a pre-recorded interview that we did yesterday. But up first, you just heard his main theme for the Mean Greens. Kick off the show. On the phone with us is Gareth Coker. Hey, Gareth.
Hey, how's it going?
Going pretty good. How are you?
I'm doing good, enjoying sunny California, even though I'm British, so it's really hot for me.
Yeah, well, you're LA? Is that where you're at?
Yeah, I'm in LA. Yep.
Yeah. Are you recording? Are you doing anything there? Are you what's going on?
Oh, I've lived here for 8 years, so this is my hub for all the work I do now. But I occasionally get out to Nashville to do some recording.
Ah, when was the last time you were in Nashville?
Let's see. What month are we in now? August. The last time I was there I was in May. Back there in May. So yeah, I usually go like 2 or 3 times a year.
What were you? Can you tell us what you were working on? What you were?
I can. We were recording the trailer for Ori and the Will of the Wisps.
Okay, nice. That's right. I forgot they announced that. I guess that's the sequel. Yeah.
Yes, the sequel. It was pretty elaborate because we had one recording session to do one piece of music, which is very unusual. Normally, you're trying to cram in as much as possible, but we just had to do a 2-minute track, and then we were done. So it was a pretty nice trip, actually. Pretty chill.
What a fantastic story for, and I'm not talking about the game itself. I'm talking about the life of what that game and that development studio has gone through. To do this thing that, hey, it may work, it may not. Microsoft published. Microsoft did the publishing on it, didn't they?
Yes, they did. It was originally an independent. Well, it still is technically an independent studio.
Yeah.
They pitched the game way back in like 2012 to various publishers, and Microsoft gave them the best deal, and the rest is history.
Yeah, it just but the success of it, and how it is great. It grew enough. I know that you were telling me that, I was trying to get a vinyl for the soundtrack. It's like, people got to want it, how the success does on the Windows release of the title and how well it just does successfully overall. And here we are getting a sequel, and you're recording new music for that. So,
yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone could have predicted that. Like we thought we were just going to be a small indie game, and technically we are a small indie game. It just Ori and the Blind Forest captured the public's imagination, and we got. I think there's an element of luck as to what captures the public imagination, but I also think we made something pretty cool as well. So it's had a life of its own, and now we get to do a sequel and see if we could do any better.
That's an interesting point. You're working on a sequel. Have you worked on sequels before?
That is a great question. I wish not many people ask that. Actually, this is actually the first time I've ever done a sequel. I'm still fairly new on the scene, so most of the stuff I'm doing is new IP. So this, for the first time, I have to revisit the old material, but I also have to make it sound new, but also also not alienate the audience completely who liked the music in the first game. So some stuff is going to have to transfer, but it still has to feel like a new soundtrack.
Yeah, that was going to be my question. How do you write for a sequel? Because obviously you got to have themes that carry over.
Yep.
I say obviously, not necessarily. That doesn't have to be the case, but because we've seen where movies get sequels before. I'm sorry, I go back to movies. I did this a lot with Jason when I was talking to him. But it's the closest thing I've got to the situation. But, sometimes movies go into sequels and they have to change composers, and that guy's like, I'm going to do my own thing, or you're just not going to get me, whatever the case may be. So sometimes you lose that familiarity, or you bring back, I don't know, you develop a new familiarity with it or something like that. I'm not exactly sure. So.
I think it's okay to do your own thing. I kind of like what they did with Harry Potter. They just kept, like, the main hook, but by the time you get to movie 6 and 7, the story's so far... It's so far removed from what you hear in the first 2 Harry Potter films that it's okay to move the music on, but there's still that, like, there's always that those 1 or 2 main hooks that I feel like remind the audience that, yes, I'm watching Harry Potter, yes, I'm watching Star Wars, yes, I'm playing Ori. I think that's super important.
Sarah with us when I told her you were going to be on, she thought, oh, that's quite a coincidence. What is it you do, Sarah?
Well, this week I was teaching a creative writing camp at the school that I work at, and one of the exercises we did was I played a few pieces of music to use as writing prompts, and I used the Ori and the Blind Forest soundtrack as one of the...
The whole thing, or which track?
I played a couple of specific tracks, and then as background music I had it playing a lot while the kids were writing. So they really responded to it. And it sparked off some really interesting stories, some very strange stories because 7-year-olds have amazing imaginations. But it was a really fun thing to do.
That's very flattering. I mean, it's really cool to hear stories like that. I've heard, it's been used in classroom. I've heard it's been used as for a figure skating routine, for a ballet routine. And people use it for studying, and they use it as inspiration, creative writing, like you're doing, and I didn't set out to do any of those things. I just tried to make the music fit the game, so it's really cool that it has a life of its own outside of the game.
What is it when you go in to compose for a game? And this again goes back to something that you'll hear me ask Jason later on, but I'm curious of your technique. We relate this to films again, where a film gets shot. For the most part, a film is being worked on or completed or something like that. But the composer will be sent, like dailies or most of the film of whatever's done. Here you go, write some music for what you're seeing. Doesn't really work that way in video games, does it? Or how does that work when you're composing music for games?
It greatly depends on the game, who is making it, and how open they want the process to be. So I'm just going to talk about narrative games for a second, because that's the easiest place to start. So I think for a narrative game, a game that's driven by the story, or at least has a strong story element to it, it is super important for the composer to be involved as early as possible, because unlike film, a lot of music, like the pace of the music, kind of has to match the pace of the gameplay, whereas in a film, you're kind of dictated to by the pace of the editing. And when you're playing a game, there is no editing, so you kind of need to match what's going on screen. And so if you have a chance to get a composer on early, you can kind of get everyone in sync on the project. Music is a major part of the game, and I think games do a little bit of a disservice if they're bringing on the composer on at the end of development, because the composer might not have a huge amount of time to really get into how the game feels, what it's like to play. There might not be enough time to absorb the art. I mean, can you imagine doing a game as big as The Witcher 3 in the last 3 months of production? It would be physically impossible because it's such a big game. And I think, so just in terms of story-driven games, if you get the composer in early, you've got a much greater chance of having everything be in sync. Whereas in film, the music isn't going to affect how the it's shot, unless it's a musical. So it's it's a lot easier to get the composer involved in nearer the end of production. With a game, I think it's better to be involved early. Now, if it's like a racing game or a fighting game, those are like set mechanics where it's like you kind of have an expectation of what the music should be. But with a story-driven game, it kind of like, at least on Ori, it kind of grew organically. So everything, like there's a lot of push and pull between all of the departments. So you kind of have to be super flexible, and all departments have to be willing to change on the fly. It's a very organic process, rather than a slightly more regimented structure that there is in film. That's also partly because games are still in their infancy compared to the film industry.
Yeah. Now you've written for multiple different genres. I'm trying to think. I'm not exactly sure what genre Ori falls into, but you've done Ori, you've done Minecraft, for God's sakes. You've done let's see, you've done the why am I drawing a blank? You did Mean Greens. You've also done Ark, which we'll get into that here in a bit as well. But you also did for VR. You composed for VR. Is that VR is such? They want that to be such an immersive thing. Is there any difference in writing for VR or than it is any other type of game?
I think it depends on the VR game. I think VR certain genres benefit hugely from VR, like horror. But the game I wrote for, which was called The Unspoken, it's basically a wizard fighting game set in the 21st century. So it's not like Harry Potter. It's like super modern Harry Potter. But there's no weird boarding school or people in fancy hats or anything. It's very modern, urban, and gritty. I think the main thing with VR is because you are literally in the world. Everything is way more intense. So the music actually, you can go two ways with the music. You don't need to. One way is that you don't need to work quite as hard to accentuate what is happening on the screen, or you can do what I did for The Unspoken and just dial it up to 11 and really overwhelm the player with like an aural bombardment, which is what we wanted to do for The Unspoken because they just wanted a really intense fighting game that all the rounds are very short, so it's intense for 5 minutes, and you're like, wow, that was crazy. And then you take a break. In some respects it's different, but in many ways it's the same. Where it really is different is in the sound design, because you've got to deal with a 360-degree field instead of sound coming from two speakers in front of you.
What's a genre that you haven't written for yet that you really want to do?
Sci-fi. Sci-fi has escaped me so far. There is a little bit of a sci-fi element in Ark Survival Evolved, but I really would just love to do an entire game set in space or on Mars or in some other galaxy or universe, just because it allows me to explore a whole bunch of different sound palettes. Whereas a game like Ori allows me to explore the fantasy thing, and I went, quite deep into that. You can't really do sci-fi sounding stuff in a fantasy game. So there's a whole bunch of electronic sounds that are like closed off from you, and I would like to be able to explore that at some point. On the other hand, I'd be totally fine writing music like Ori for the rest of my life.
Yeah. Have you written for the horror genre?
No, I haven't. But you know what? That's a tough one. I feel like I enjoy horror so much, and I enjoy other people's takes on it, that I would be probably way too critical on myself in the writing process. I'd love to give it a go sometime, but funnily, you've got a composer on in the second hour who is probably he is, in my opinion, probably the greatest horror video game composer out there. He one of my favorite games ever is Dead Space. The opening 4 hours of Dead Space is ridiculous. It's perfection. And they're also basically, what my point is that there are lots of other people who are doing that really well, and I'm kind of happy to leave them do it. If I were to do a horror game, I'd have to do a lot of research. I feel like I'd be a little bit behind the gun. Whereas my comfort zone is definitely doing cinematic or fantasy stuff. But I would love to give it a go sometime because getting out of your comfort zone can push you to do things that you didn't know you're capable of. But it has to be the right project.
Yeah. One of the, we were talking last night because I wanted to get some tracks lined up for you, and you had mentioned that a particular track out of Ark was, I don't necessarily want to say your favorite, but it was one of the most intense you had ever done.
Yeah.
And we're gonna listen to that, and then we're gonna come back and talk about that with you. It is
okay. Cool.
It is the Overseer track from Ark. That when does Ark release? That's releasing very soon, right?
August 29th.
August 29th is when Ark's going to hit. I know everybody's thinking, isn't it out? No. It's in early access, but it finally gets the whole push.
The version 1, yes.
Yeah.
The final version 1 is out on August 29th, and there'll be a big influx of players, I think, on August 29th.
So this is the track called The Overseer. It is from Ark, and we're going to listen to that and then come back and talk to Gareth about this track. It's an amazing track. Here we go. That was pretty epic, man. That was Overseer from the Ark soundtrack. Why is that now? Aside from the obvious of just the way it sounds, why was that the most? You said it was the most intense thing you've ever done, or stressful, maybe?
There's so many different reasons. So, first of all, like for those of you who don't know Ark Survival Evolved, which is probably very few of you at this point, it's a pretty epic game to begin with. There's dinosaurs. There's all kinds of variations on those dinosaurs. There's sharks. There's sharks that shoot lasers from their eyes. And the further you progress into the game, kind of the crazier it gets. And this track is for the final big bad boss at the end of the game, which I don't think it's actually going in until or into the game until August the 29th, because this is something that has been withheld from early access. Anyway, so they needed the music is already pretty epic for the game, but they needed one epic track to rule them all. So that was basically the brief, and they wanted to have the main theme in there. They needed a little bit of a sci-fi element, but they also needed it to sound massive. I'm like, well, okay, I'll give it my best shot. So a couple of things about why it's difficult. First of all, the tempo is 200 beats per minute, and that's really, really fast. Like most music falls into the range of like 90 to 150 beats per minute. So like this is just a much faster tempo. Like you heard the basic speed is like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Most of the music in the game is like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's like it feels almost twice as quick. So that was the first thing. Now, when music is that quick, you have to write a lot of it just to fill the time. Like, this is a 4.5 minute track, but it's like that's a lot of music to fill 4.5 minutes at that speed.
How big was the ensemble for that?
The ensemble was 93 players. So we had 60 strings, 12 woodwind, 16 brass, and 4 percussionists. I think that adds up to 93. And a piano. So that was the other major concern. I'm like, because it's so fast and it's very rhythmic and there's some pretty tricky writing going on, I'm like, is the orchestra going to be able to play this? Well, I should not have worried, because fortunately we were able to go to London and record at Abbey Road with the Philharmonia Orchestra, who are one of the best orchestras in London. And what you just heard, they'd never seen the music before, and what you just heard was take 2.
Oh, wow.
Oh, my gosh.
Wow.
So, they're pretty good. It was funny.
You did take 2. Did you do any more takes after that, or and say,
yeah,
you know
of course,
what,
we did some stuff for precaution, but like sometimes you just get getting a good recording is about as much about getting the right feel as opposed to it being technically perfect. Like you might have a technically perfect recording, but the feel might be lost, and you might get it the other way around. This was just one of those happy cases where we technically there are no mistakes and it sounds amazing. So I'm like, well, we'll record some extra stuff just in case we need to edit it in. But I'm like, this sounds pretty done to me. I think the reason for that is because I told the orchestra, I was like, I think this is the hardest piece you're going to play over these 3 days. And when you tell the orchestra that, they kind of like, ooh, a challenge. And then they kind of rise to it. Recording music is something that is very, in my opinion, dependent on chemistry. And so it's as much about me, but it's also about my conductor and how the musicians are responding to the conductor. Because I don't conduct my own music because I like to listen to the end result. So I choose my times carefully to go out and speak to the orchestra because they don't actually see me that often over the 3 days. But they know if I'm coming out, things are getting serious. So I came out at the beginning of this one. I was like, this is going to be difficult. And I think they looked through the music, and I could see grins going up on their face. I'm like, ooh, a challenge. We'll kind of struggle through this on take 1. It wasn't really a struggle, but and then on take 2, it was just all there. I was really worried about it just because I'd never written anything this fast or this big before. The previous biggest ensemble I'd written for was 65 players. So jumping from 65 to 93 is quite a big jump. Plus, then there's the added pressure. Like, I'm in Abbey Road, which is where they recorded Lord of the Rings. They recorded some Star Wars scores there. I'm recording one of the best orchestras in London. So I'm like, man, this is the pressure's on. Like, I don't want to look like a fool here. I hope I've written this well enough that they can play it and it will sound good. And fortunately, everything came together. But I think also when you don't have the fear factor when you're having one of these big recordings, that's the time to worry, because I think it means you've stopped caring. I was scared the whole 3 days that something would go wrong, but fortunately it didn't, because I'd prepared really well. But it's always nerve-wracking while you're there, because sometimes things come up that you can't possibly plan for. But on the other hand, you know, when you've got 3 days with an orchestra playing your music, it doesn't really get much better than that, at least for a composer.
We need to take a commercial break. Can you stay on the line with us so we can come back and talk to you? So we're going to take a commercial break. We're going to go out with a track from the Minecraft series that you worked on. You did the Minecraft Chinese mythology?
Yes.
I'm not familiar with this. Is that just like an add-on pack to this, or was it a...
So for the console edition of the game, they have so many add-ons, and this is one of them. If I were to describe it bluntly, it's basically a reskin of Minecraft, but themed with Chinese mythology.
Okay. The track we're using, and I'm going to mess this up, I'm going to butcher the pronunciation on this, is Zoo, no, probably not Zoo, oh man, Zhubaije.
Oh, Zubaiji. I mean, even I can't pronounce it, but
okay.
It's one of the battle tracks. Yeah, I know the one you mean.
Okay.
This is meant to represent one of the mythical warriors in the game.
Well, when we come back, we're going to talk to you about how because you had to incorporate completely different, probably instruments you hadn't worked with before.
Correct.
In order to get that sound out. So we'll talk to you about that as well when we come back with more of In-Game Chat. We are talking with Gareth Coker on the phone. It is our music episode, and we've got more music to come here on In-Game Chat. We'll be right back. And welcome back to In-Game Chat. This is our music episode. We are playing music all throughout this episode and talking with composers of the music that we are playing. We are on the phone right now with Gareth Coker, who composed the theme for Ark. And as we went into the break, you heard music from the Minecraft Chinese mythology download pack thing for Minecraft. I don't do a lot of Minecraft, so I'm not sure. But he wrote music for that. And that kind of puts you in a position because you did the Chinese mythology and you did, I think, the Greek mythology as well?
Yes, that's correct, yeah. The Greek one was the first one I did, and then the Chinese one I did a year later.
And so you had to you had to write and I guess write for instruments that you were not familiar with.
Correct. See, now, like, the trick to doing that is to hire literally the best you can possibly find and hope that their fee won't bankrupt you. Fortunately, so on the track that you heard just before the break, one of the featured instruments is the Chinese violin, which is called an erhu. And again, to my great fortune, one of the best erhu players maybe ever, Karen Han, lives in Los Angeles. And I sent her an email and said, would you be interested in playing on Minecraft? And she said yes. And I was like, okay, well, this is going to make my life a lot easier. Now, the other thing I was worried about is, okay, how do you write for an instrument that was made in China? Because they don't use the same notation system that we do. And she just said, no, just write it as you would for, like, a flute or a violin or a piano or whatever, and I'll figure it out. And I'm like, okay, that makes my life a lot easier. And yeah, basically she fills the role of a musical translator. She takes my notes and figures out how to play them on her instrument. The only thing that she mentioned is don't write too many high notes because the tension on the string, it might snap because the tension really increases a great deal on the high notes. So you're only supposed to spend a little bit of time up there. Most of it's you've got to spend time on the lower notes on the instrument. But yeah, when you hire good players, they take a lot of the unknowns away for you, so you can just focus on writing the music. So in that respect, it made my job a lot easier. So that's my advice to anyone who writes music: is if you hire good people, they can end up making you look maybe better than you actually are.
For writing, like, you haven't worked on a sequel though, but is there anything that has ever challenged you to the point where you've had to kind of change your method to where you're gonna to how you write, or something that you want to challenge you that way?
I think on every different project there's always a new challenge. I'll take Ark as the most recent example. So when writing for orchestra, I wanted to write all of the parts myself, and for 130 minutes of music for 93 players, and you've got all of this other stuff that you've got to manage as well, it becomes physically impossible to do that. And this is not uncommon in the film or game world. Like, most composers will have orchestrators who take your track and just make sure it's arranged for the orchestra in the best possible way. Now, in Ori, I did this all myself, partially because we didn't have any money to hire an orchestrator, so I had to do it all myself. On Ark, I did all of the core game myself, but there's several expansions and add-ons to the game, and I'm like, I just can't physically do this all myself unless I don't sleep for the next month. So I think actually the biggest challenge and the hardest thing for a composer to do is to learn to delegate, because ultimately this is a business. So, like, we have to, at the end of the day, we have to deliver an end result. The people who are making art don't care that I'm not getting any sleep. All they want to hear is, like, a finished result. So, if I was writing music just for myself, then I could spend, like, the next 3 years writing my symphony and no one would bother me. But unfortunately, I don't have 3 years for art. So that's the thing I've, like, learned to do a little bit better in the last, like, year and a half, is learning just to which parts of the process I'm willing to delegate. And it's not like I'm delegating this to people I don't know. Like, the people the conductor who I work with, for example, I've known for 8 years. The orchestrator who I've worked with, I've known for 7 years. So it's a good way for me to bring in my friends, I guess, who I also went to school with. So I know they're really good. But in terms of actual musical challenges for writing, they're all kind of their own unique talents. So I feel like my job is a problem-solving thing first, and then that's a fun part of it for me. It's like, how can I make the best possible solution so I can elevate this game with my little aspect of it with the music.
Well, what are you? I got some weird feedback there on the phone. There we go. We're better. What have you, or you probably can't tell us because Jason couldn't tell us either. What are you currently working on? Other than I mean Ori, but anything else?
Yeah, there's stuff in the pipeline that I can't mention, but I mean I can say that like I've done so much stuff for Minecraft. Like I've done the Greek mythology, the Chinese mythology. There's been a ton of like little mini game modes. They've got this battle game mode. They've got this game mode called Tumble. They've got this game mode called Glide, they all make use of different mechanics in the Minecraft world, and they're all like mini games that are in the console edition of Minecraft. And I'm sure, I can't say for certain, but there's probably going to be more of that, assuming they bring me back. The Unspoken is doing a couple of expansions that should be out before the end of the year. So that's kind of cool to revisit the electronic VR world again. But I mean, mostly from now, through to whenever we finish it, it's going to be Ori and the Will of the Wisps, and the daunting prospect of writing the music for the sequel, and knowing what we have planned for the game. I'm excited about it because if we pull it off, it'll be really awesome. But that's about as much as I can go into.
No, it's understandable. Jason didn't break either, so I couldn't get any info out of him. But anyway, we thank you so much for doing this interview with us and being on the show. And I appreciate your friendship over the years. Just having you to be able to talk to you, find out where you're going to be, and try and meet up with you just to say hello and get you to sign my vinyls. So I really do you know if ARC's getting a vinyl, by the way?
I am pretty sure it is. We just need to we need to confirm it with the distributor, but that is definitely the plan.
Okay.
So
awesome.
And ARC will have a life beyond August 29th for sure. So they've probably got a couple more expansions or something lined up. I know they've announced at least one. So
yeah.
So yeah, there'll be more ARC, which means there'll be more opportunities to like at least get a vinyl out there over the next, I don't know whether it'll be 2 months, 3 months, but it's coming soon.
Okay. Now, before we go though, I wanted to talk to you. I had asked you this, what your favorite piece of music might be from from somebody else
Yep.
from somebody you admired or that you enjoyed the music from, and you mentioned it was from Assassin's Creed 2. Oh God, it's not Jesper. It's how do you pronounce his name? Jesper?
I don't know. I just say Jesper Kid, but it might be Jesper. So,
okay, I don't know. We'll say Jesper Kid then. I also feel so bad when you do it. But you mentioned it was. It's basically it's track number 1 off of the Assassin's Creed 2 soundtrack. It's called Earth.
Yep.
Why? So why do you? What about that? Do you love from a composer standpoint, I guess, or do you just love it from a fan?
I think I'm a huge fan of the Assassin's Creed games, and I think Assassin's Creed 2 is comfortably the best in the series, especially with its wild ending. I love the ending. I'm not going to spoil it for anyone who hasn't played it, but the ending is wild in the best way. But this track, one of the reasons I love it is just because it's a good listen, like away from the game, and not every game score can do that. Like, a lot of the game music has to serve the gameplay first, so away from the game it might not work quite as well, but this track stands on its own. It's a really enjoyable listen by itself, which is a good start, but also it has a very, very simple but highly identifiable little vocal theme in there, which plays all the way through the game. It's a very simple hook. And also, I think the thing I love about it is he's got modern elements in the music. Like, there's electric guitar in Assassin's Creed 2. Like, what is that doing in ancient Italy? But it's the way it's combined with some of the sounds of that era like the older plucked instruments. It's combined in a beautiful way. Assassin's Creed 2 is about, we're using the future to dive into the past, and he's taken the future elements and put a little bit of them in the music, but it has a sound of its own, and I feel like I could try to imitate Jesper Kid's music, but it still wouldn't sound as good. There's just a magic in the song that I can't really describe. I just know it when I hear it, and as soon as I hear like the combination of those instruments, I'm like back in that world like after 3 seconds of hearing it. There's certain soundtracks that I think are irreplaceable. I think there are soundtracks that are irreplaceable, and there are soundtracks that are interchangeable. The interchangeable ones I'm not a fan of, because you can put the soundtrack from one game directly into another one, you might not notice the difference. But the Assassin's Creed 2 soundtrack in particular is one that I think is irreplaceable, and I think he just nailed the vibe perfectly, and it's summed up in this track, which I think you hear pretty near the beginning of the game.
Well, thank you so much for being with us on the show, and just for everything else. We appreciate having you on, and can't wait to talk to you again, man, and listen to your next stuff. So.
Yep, thanks very much, Scott and Sarah.
Thank you so much. Talk to you later.
All right, cheers.
Bye-bye. This is the track he was referring to. It is Assassin's Creed 2 Earth, written by Jesper Kid. We'll take a listen to that and come right back and play your requests. That is music from Assassin's Creed 2, and if we have time permitting, you might hear another track from Assassin's Creed 2 later on, if we get to my favorites, and you probably know which one it is. But anyway, it was a bit of a short notice when we decided to do this, but nevertheless, you guys came through with submissions for the show. We're going to start with Chris first. He calls us almost every single week. He has been on the show a few times, too, and he's just a huge fan of what we do, and we always appreciate everybody that listens to us. One of the tracks that he sent in came from a Sega CD title, and it's called Vay. At least I hope it is. I could be mispronouncing it wrong. V-A-Y. That is it. It can't get any easier, right? But I'm probably screwing it up. He goes on to say that it's probably my favorite out of all the RPGs that I have played. The story from this one sunk its claws into me and made it my favorite. You start out the game marrying the love of your life, who washed up on the beach with no memories a few years ago. The wedding is crashed, as weddings often do, by mechs, who destroy your kingdom's castle and kidnap your bride. You seek out 5 power orbs, because that's how you get rid of mechs, that will power up an alien mech suit that crashed on your planet years ago and started destroying everything because the pilot was dead. It is the oldest of tales. Its power was... Its power. I'm honestly not making fun of you, Chris. This whole story is amazing. Its power was sealed away in the orbs you seek throughout the game. All the music and songs, like with most other Sega CD games, can be accessed by a CD player right off the disc. The last boss is by far the toughest boss in any RPG I have ever played. I have played through this game 3 or 5 times and beat it from beginning to end over the years. I believe this is the boss battle from Vey. That is music from Vey. Chris actually called to correct me. That was the end. I guess maybe the end credits, the ending to Vey, not the boss battle. So thank you, Chris, for calling in and making the correction, and thank you for sending that in. Another longtime listener of the show is Bill. He sent us music from Alan Wake a long time ago. We used it for a good while on the show. He writes, "My game of the year for 2012 was Bravely Default for the 3DS. It is basically a Final Fantasy game, but without the Final Fantasy name. Very notable was the plot and storyline and the music, which I still listen to all the time." Now, he sent us multiple tracks, but I decided to go with the first one. Bill says, "This is the main start screen music and just encapsulates the majestic sound of this game. It always got me ready to play." So this, from Bravely Default, is the track called Overture to Hope. It will take us into our next break, and when we come back, we will be talking with Jason Graves for the next segment of the show. We'll be right back with more in-game chat after this. And welcome back to In-Game Chat. It is our special music episode, and you just heard music there from Far Cry Primal, and the composer of Far Cry Primal is talking with us today. It is Jason Graves. Hey, Jason.
Ooga chugga, ooga chugga.
Why didn't you use that?
Like, if you're playing Far Cry Primal, I feel like I should say something like that. Yeah, it's in there actually. I'm in the soundtrack a lot, breathing and very embarrassingly heavy breathing and stomping and things, just not ooga chucking.
Welcome to the show. Where are we talking to you at? Where are you at right now?
I'm in North Carolina.
Is that your home? Is that where you live?
Yep, that's where I live.
And is that where you also do your work, I guess, out of the house there, or do you have a studio, or what?
I mean, I've got a studio here. I'm just outside of Raleigh, which is the capital, on a big piece of property with lots of woods and stuff, and have the studio and the house out here, which is awesome.
You're probably one of the closest interviews we've ever had, because most people are out in L.A. or somewhere else in they're either doing stuff over there or whatever the case. We're out of Alabama.
Right, I saw that, which is so cool. Fellow Southerners.
Exactly, Montgomery, Alabama. So,
nice.
What are you? I'm going to jump right into it. What are you currently working on?
Oh, all kinds of fun stuff I'm not allowed to talk about.
I hate that.
I know, right?
That's what I hate about the games industry. They're always like, I can't say anything, but you're going to say later. Why can't you say now?
Yeah, I know. And then when you can say later, you're so inducted into secrecy that you feel guilty about talking about it, even when you're allowed to. But, what are you going to do?
Can you give us any hints? Can you give us, like, it's a AAA title, or it's an indie title, or it's a Sony title, or can you give us anything?
Yeah, all those sound good.
All right, fine. Yeah, I'm not cracking this egg, unfortunately.
Yeah, sorry.
No,
I've been tortured by worse.
You're too good. You outsmarted me. Well, that's fine. Then what's the last thing that you what's the most recent thing you completed? What's the thing you just finished?
There you go. Let's see. What's the most recent thing that came out? Lone Echo.
Nice. Yeah.
VR title.
Yeah, totally. Well, that's an interesting thing to go into. How is there any difference in writing music for a VR title than it is for just a regular old video game?
I'd say that the composition standpoint, like the mental kind of approach that I use as a composer, isn't any different, because I'm still trying to write music that's engaging the listener and working with the gameplay. But sometimes the intent of the music can be different, just depending on what the developer is going for. I did another game called Farlands that was a VR game that shipped with the original Oculus back a year and a half ago, and that was just it was just supposed to play kind of as background music, but it was still very detailed in terms of the implementation and sensory integration and things like that. With Lone Echo, the music is definitely more of a two-track. It's there during the menus and during pausing when you're playing the game and things like that. It's not in the actual gameplay, because the developer thought that the game would be that much more immersive because you're in space and you're supposed to be alone without music playing, without music kind of comforting you. And when the music comes in is when you're not in the game. And it's interesting, because VR, I don't think personally is that different the way you approach designing and playing games, but a lot of people, it's taking them into new directions that I don't think they would have gone in before. That I think people like music or sound editors are normally a lot more comfortable trying different things than most people, and we would love to do things like that just in regular games. And now VR is kind of giving everyone else sort of an excuse to, like, oh, hey, this is VR, we should totally try to do something different, which is always the most fun thing about games.
Yeah, well, VR is I'm a huge fan of VR. I have been ever since I've been to, I don't know how many E3s where I put something on my face. All these different prototypes and stuff for the Vive, for the Rift, for the for the PlayStation VR thing that they had, and I can't remember what that was called at the time, but I've experienced a lot of VR stuff, and I get what you're saying. It's like, oh, this is a moment for us to use music or music and sound both in a way that we haven't done before, because it is so immersive. They are trying to put you inside the environment that you're in. Which I guess may be the reason when they talk about Lone Echo saying, well, he's in space, so we want you to have There's no music around there, that sort of thing. So that would be quite interesting to have to, I guess, write for something like that. Obviously, you've got moments where you're going to have spike, cues of, spike cues type things that come in, but just ambient music might be a little interesting for something where they're saying, well, there's not much music in space, and we kind of want to immerse the player in that.
And I think every game's completely different, and they're, of course, completely justified trying to do anything that they want to do. It's just one of those things that it depends on what kind of vision they're trying to get across for the game. And like I said before, it's almost like VR is giving people an excuse to try some super radical things, because I don't think anyone would say, well, let's put out this first-person shooter and not have any music at all.
Right.
At all, like anywhere. So it's cool. I mean, I'm always up for taking chances and trying new things.
Speaking of just writing music in general, which is exactly what we're talking about, it's the music show, and our guest right now is Jason Graves, composer of, we got Tomb Raider and Far Cry Primal, and we've got Until Dawn and The Order, massive list of games that you've been working on, Lone Echo, of course, that you talked about, and some unmentioned games, because he hasn't told us. But how do you... I know. I'm gonna bug you about that.
Yeah.
How do you start off the writing process? I'm always interested in this. The two things that interest me are puzzle games. How do people make up those puzzles? And then the other thing is for music. How do composers film? It's so interesting. Video games get closely related to films, and I know how that works. The movie gets cut most of the time, done, and they send that over to the composer, who watches it and develops music out of what they're watching or what the director asks for. You really don't have much... Do you have much to go on when you write the music for video games? Do you have any kind of workable... I mean, how does that work?
Well, if I have my druthers, I'm involved from as early as possible with the developer. Even if they don't need me to write a note for a year, I'm on that journey with them. So as they're coming up with concept art and thinking about different worlds or how the characters are going to interact with each other or the general storyline, it's something that I'm able to absorb as they're working on it. Because what I don't like to do, and this happens a lot as well, is get called 6 weeks before the deadline and say, holy cow, we've got this cool game. We really want you to do music for it. What's your schedule like for the next 6 weeks? It's sort of like sigh. Hopefully I'm available, but man, I wish I had some more time to sort of marinate in the game and get a feel for it.
Well, that's when you jack up the price. That's when you jack up the price.
Right. That's the fast, cheap, good. Pick
exactly.
Two, right?
You pick two. Yep. I know. I work in production at the radio station. I know that. It's like you get it good, cheap, or fast. Pick two of those.
Yeah. Well, you just call my agent after we get off the phone. And totally work that out. Because a lot of it for me, 99%, is more than a lot, is the inspiration just found in what the developers are creating. The world, because it literally is. I don't care what kind of game it is. They are creating their own world. It doesn't matter if it's a platform game or a puzzle game or their own sounds, their own visuals. Everything is being made from scratch, and they're creating a world that the music should feel naturally a part of, and that's where it all comes from. Normally with sounds, for me, what sounds to use, and almost more importantly, what sounds not to use. Do I need an orchestra? Yes, an orchestra would work. Well, how many instruments from the orchestra can I send home and not use and still get the idea across of this game being a different sounding orchestra than the orchestra that maybe the previous game I had worked on or the developers had worked on sounded like? So it's both a matter of kind of personal variety to keep me entertained, and then variety on the developer's point to make sure that they're getting a unique sounding score that doesn't just sound like the next score from a game. Maybe they're doing a puzzle game, the next puzzle game that comes out. You know, they always say we want something that's unique and interesting.
How do you even begin? We want something unique and interesting.
Yeah.
And then you get through that process and send it. I mean, do you have to send it to them and they have to do approval on it, or is it something that they're getting bits and pieces of, all the time, so they can make sure the direction's going, I guess, the way they want to, or do they just give you free reign? I don't know.
Usually, creatively, I do get a lot of freedom. I think the expression is enough rope to hang yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They let me flex my creative muscles. And honestly, I have yet
yesterday was a perfect example of it. It's something I can't talk about, of course, but the developer kept saying, "Oh, we wish it had a little more upbeat, a little more, I can't quite describe it." And I was thinking, I know what you want, but you haven't asked for that specifically, but I'm just going to go ahead and go for it. And I just laid down something that they had not originally asked for, and they didn't even realize they wanted. And I thought they're not going to like it. And he came back and said, "Holy cow, this is perfect. This is exactly what we needed." But he couldn't describe it because he didn't know what it was exactly. So he can't say, "No, I don't want this. I do want that." It's more of a creative relationship, right? It's a back and forth.
Yeah, music. Oh man, I mean, it's art for one, and art is so subjective.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so just it is the meaning of whatever the person takes from it, and that amounts to its worth to them. So it's very tough because what you consider, especially the stuff you work on, I'm sure, you consider that to be like that's really, really important to me, and that is worth everything to me. And then they listen to something and they say, "Well, we just don't like all this work and effort that you put into that. Could you get us something else?" And I guess it's a struggle back and forth. I really don't know, but have you ever had to go back before and like redo an entire thing?
I'm pretty lucky. I think my background in advertising, which was a lot of commercials and movie trailers, and then TV and film music when I used to live in Los Angeles once I was in school a long time ago. I was sort of just beaten down into submission of like listening to what someone says, musically interpreting it, and giving them my version of what I think they need without putting too much of myself, like, I really want to play drums today or something like that. It's like, I really want to play drums, and man, I think that would work for them. So I don't have a lot. Normally, I mean, like Tomb Raider, I think it was maybe 5 hours of music, and we had a couple of cues that we had to change around only because the gameplay was changing. Oh, and actually, this is a big key secret for me, I should say, that you asked earlier that I didn't mention. I usually enjoy writing some sort of a suite, like maybe 8 to 12 minutes of music up front before, sometimes even before I've been hired. I've been known to do 7 or 8 minutes of music just to get my ears around what it could sound like.
Yeah.
And in the case of Tomb Raider, I'd mentioned that, and they took that and said, "Well, great, could you write a suite that includes this, 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 and this?" And we planned it out ahead of time. And once the suite was finished, that was kind of the idea for the whole game. So there's not much correction because everyone's already on the same page.
Well, that brings me to another. You wrote for Tomb Raider, which is already an established franchise type thing, and I can't really go back and remember what maybe the overall running theme for Tomb Raider was back in the early games before they did the reboot and everything. But have you ever come on board a franchise or a sequel or something like that where some sort of style had already been established that you've got to either ride on to continue with, or like you said, you get free reign, so maybe they tell you, "Hey, go do your own thing, we don't care about the past"?
A great example of that where I was a little stymied at the beginning was when I was brought back after the first Dead Space. I was brought back to score the sequel, and EA, it was a surprise hit, I think, for everyone outside of the Dead Space developers. They worked so hard and tirelessly. I think they felt super justified getting the attention that they did. But with the sequel, EA sort of kind of motioned their hands in a circle and was like, "Okay, great, well, just do what you guys did last time, but make it different." And I didn't have a lot of stylistic direction, and it was really on me to figure out, well, I don't want to do the exact same thing, but obviously it still has to sound like it lives in that universe. And again, each game, there was a different storyline and different characters and different setting for the second game than there was for the original. So I just fell back on that. Different story, okay, I can use different instruments, different characters, I can use different themes, different settings, I can use different textures. And I say the same would be said for anything else. I did a Command and Conquer sequel, and that had a very established sort of orchestral, big cinematic soundscape. But no one was really concerned about sounding like the other ones. They just wanted to sound unique and big and powerful. And I think that's mostly people are concerned about being as original as they can and still holding true to that legacy.
Now, you're talking about Dead Space, and that brings me to a genre that you're familiar with, obviously because of Dead Space, and Until Dawn and a couple of others. But I suppose the horror genre, the suspense, the horror. When you're writing for that, when you're writing an overall theme for that, and I don't know, forgive me for being ignorant on the subject, but I don't know if this is something that production does after the fact, where they put in your spikes, the cues, when you get I don't know what they're called. That really stingers.
That's what you're
exactly
looking for. Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. When they put in the stingers, I don't know if that's something they do or if that's something, because I can listen to your Dead Space track and I can hear the stingers in there, but I don't necessarily know that these are lining up with anything that's happening in the game while I'm playing it. Or
well,
is it?
It's a fantastic part about what made Dead Space so scary. I think the team had an original audio engine they had built from scratch for use with The Godfather, and it just wasn't used to its full extent, and it really got a workout in Dead Space, because one of the really neat things that I loved about it was they had 3 different strengths of stingers, kind of low, medium, and high, and those were randomized within each individual strength. So if you went down a hallway and something jumped out at you and a low stinger played, now they're all super scary, it's just slightly lower. A low stinger plays, you get killed. You walk down the same hallway, the same thing jumps out, a different low stinger is going to play because they're random. And just not having that exact same replay of the music every single time left people on edge constantly. And I didn't know which one would play at any point in time. I just kind of knew the classification of the stinger that was in this general area. And that's another great thing about horror. Everything sort of goes with everything, because when you're just going, bah! It kind of all works, right?
Yes. That's always interested me, though, because I know it's interesting how video games work, and again, I go back to the film comparison where all of that is scripted and ready to happen in movies, and it's just right there. Whereas video games, it's not scripted to happen at the same time. It's going to probably happen because the player's going to have to initiate it, but when that actually comes about is completely up in the air. And so I guess that's obviously probably not something you work with, but I guess that's just something that's laid down. Whenever an event is triggered, it cues up whatever track you've got set for that particular moment.
And a lot of it is really choosing the importance of those moments, and when should the music emphasize them, when should the music ignore them, and you don't want to do what an industry term is called Mickey Mousing, which goes back actually more to the classic kind of Hanna-Barbera, you move their arm and they take steps, doom, 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 doom. You don't want the music to accentuate every little decision that the characters make. So a lot of it depends on not only how important the event is, if the music's going to change, but when's the last time an event like that happened, and when's the next event going to happen. Because if they're minutes apart, that would lean more towards let's do something to make this a significant musical event as well. But if some of these events can get triggered every 20 or 30 seconds, you're going to want to sit back and let things ride a little bit. I mean, a lot of it really has to do with the perspective of where you are. It's almost like a sentence. Mm-hmm. Where the word is in the sentence at the beginning or towards the end has a different meaning, where the emphasis goes. I love to write music. I love to write music. They have two completely different meanings depending on how you emphasize them.
It sounds like a headache to try and figure out.
It's more like a really fun puzzle game that you're playing with some of your best friends.
Yeah, I get, but again, you can't. You're not seeing. I guess you're not seeing mostly what the player is going to be seeing, because they either don't have that ready for you yet, or what they have is not near what it's going to be in the final version of the game. I guess this is only me speculating, because again, I'm completely ignorant on the subject. I love it, but I'm still ignorant on the whole process of how it works. So
a lot of it depends on how much time you get. If you're in it, like for Dead Space, I was in it for 3.5 years before the game even came out, so I really had concrete visuals of what stuff was going to look like. And
by the time it came down to really getting the bulk of the music written, I didn't have time to look at it anyway, but I'd been on board for so long, I knew exactly. We had shorthand, we knew what we were talking about. This needs to do this, and I could write the music, and I didn't even need to see the game because I'd been on board for so long. Other things, yes, I'm very used to suspending my disbelief and using a very strong imagination and thinking, okay, that person hovering in the air with their arms and legs straight out, with a robot voice going, "I love you so much, please don't go." I'm supposed to be writing a really emotional scene for this character.
What is the what's the most difficult not game, I guess, but what's the most difficult time you've had writing?
I would say I would use the word challenging, and honestly, the most challenging is when it does get really interactive. I've had some games where I'm delivering 20 or 30 different, they call them stems, but it's one piece of music with 20 or 30 different little pieces that can all be played in different ways. And what makes it the most challenging isn't writing the music, but trying to write the music so that all those 30 pieces kind of work in different ways. And a lot of times I can play test it as well. So I would be the one putting it into the game, and I'd have a copy of the game here, and I could literally get instant gratification. Even if it's stick figures with robot voices moving around, I can hear how the music's going to interact, knowing what the gameplay will finally look like. But it's still a lot of moving parts. That's the most challenging. And then going back and tweaking it, and having time helps, but the most challenging is definitely interactive music.
Well, what game gave you that challenge?
Well, it started with Dead Space. That was the first one that I had really done. That was only 4 pieces of music, and they all needed to interact together. And then it's gone on and more, depending on, even the second Dead Space was 8 different pieces, and then by Dead Space 3, it was 12 or 16, and that was, 5 or 6 years ago. So all these games, they can be as complicated as they want to. We're literally to the point where we're not limited by the technology. We're limited by our resources, our personal resources, in terms of how much time the composer has, and more importantly, how much time the developer has to implement all this stuff.
And what of your work is the one that you're most proud of? Right, pick a favorite.
Yeah, that's tough. Well, I really did enjoy Dead Space 2 because I was past the horrible nightmares of concern on the first one, because I just didn't know how any of it was going to work. And when it came out on the other end and got some notoriety and it sounded a lot better than I was hoping it was going to sound, not because I thought it would sound terrible, it was an unproven technique for me. I felt a lot more comfortable working on Dead Space 2, and it was the same team, it was the same guys. We were given a lot of freedom. I'd say probably that one and The Order 1886, only because the game was so beautiful and well done, and I got to do a live score at Abbey Road with all these wonderful musicians. I was there for an entire week, and it was just like a dream come true.
Those are the two things I take away on a positive note from that game. Not that I ever considered it bad. It was just a really quick playthrough for me, but it was one of the prettiest games I'd ever played, in the most brown color ever. But it was really, really pretty. And then the score for the game were the two things that stuck out the most for The Order.
Thank you.
Yes.
What a beautiful shade of brown.
It really was. It was nice brown, gray. It was very drab. It was London. But it was still, God, it was so beautiful to play, and to look at there. And then, of course, with the music with it was just fantastic. And I would love to be, well, I wouldn't love to be, but I know a lot of people would like to think that I'm just blowing smoke, but I'm really not. I have this score on vinyl. It is a beautiful score. You've autographed it, which I can't thank you enough for. And I really wish that that Greg was going to be doing another composer panel at PAX this year, because that's when I get all my vinyl signed. Is that the yeah. But he's not doing one this year, so I'm not going to get anything signed this year. And I've got some new ones too. But what is your favorite score that's not yours? What's your favorite piece that actually isn't yours? What are you a fan of?
Well, I don't. I do. There's a lot. There's so many scores that I love. But if we're talking about video game music specifically, I don't really think about the specific titles as I do people. And I'm the same way if I'm in GameStop. I don't see BioShock and Journey and Dear Esther, I see Gary Scheinman, Austin Wintory, Jessica Curry, and those are probably my top 3 favorite people working in games today. And what was wonderful was I met them before I knew their music, especially Gary. I met him a long time ago, but I met him before I knew their music, and I loved them so much as people. And then I went back and started discovering their music, and it's been, I mean, the latest one. I think I've known Jess for 3 years now, so it's just been a wonderful journey with them, hearing all this amazing music that they make, and knowing them, personally. Before that, it just makes me love the music even more.
Well, Jason, it's been great talking with you. You mentioned Austin. I got that autograph too, the Journey vinyl.
Oh, sweet.
Oh, God. Love those things. Man, going to get me off on a tangent. But I want to thank you again for being on our show and giving us your time and just, give us a peek inside of your process and how it works.
Oh, totally. My pleasure. Thank you for the great questions.
Oh, no. Love having you on. Thank you so much. And I can't wait to either meet you again for about 5 seconds as you sign a vinyl or have you on the show again sometime very soon when we do this again. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. We'll be sure to make it more than 5 seconds next time.
Fantastic. All right, everybody, that was Jason Graves. Thank you again, Jason, so much. We are going to go to a break, but before we do, we're going to play a track from Jason's work. In fact, since he brought it up, we're going to play Dead Space 2. So we've got that coming up here on In-Game Chat, and we will be right back after this. Welcome back to In-Game Chat. It is our special music episode. We're on the second one. We've been doing this for 10 years, and we've only done this our second one we've ever done. I'm Scott, along with Sarah. We're in the host part of the show, playing the favorites of the hosts here, and we started with Sarah first. This is from The Flame in the Flood. It is called In the Eddy. And what is it about this track that you made this request for?
Well, this game there's no dialogue. It's just you and the music.
Okay.
And it's a very lonely game. You're a single character in a post-apocalyptic environment trying to get down the river. And so the music is the only thing you really have to hold on to. And I just really love it.
Where does this particular track play?
So the game is interesting. It's a permadeath situation. You go back to the beginning every time you die, and your loyal canine companion brings you, the stuff you've stored on him. So you're just constantly trying to get down the river, and the music is randomized.
Okay.
So you may get a track with vocals. You may just get one of the instrumentals.
Right. In searching for music, I came across tracks that had vocals.
Yeah.
It's very in this vein.
Yeah.
Acoustic sort of southerny ballad type.
Yeah, exactly.
thing.
It never really specifies where you are, but the game is very definitely in a southern setting. Everything has been pretty much wiped out, so it's you, your dog, and a really terrible raft that you've built. And the goal is to get all the way to the end of the river where maybe there's somebody else who can help you.
It was a fantastic score. Gives me just a tad bit of a Last of Us feel, maybe.
Yeah.
So now we're going to move on to Matt, who sent us a few tracks. I'm going to try to get to all of them. Again, like I said, we have 19 tracks to play. So far, we have played, we've dropped one so far in the list. So hopefully we can get to the other 18 of these. But
Are all Matt's Monkey Island?
you're close. You're close. They're LucasArts, so close enough, right? He's requested this next track a few times, but we keep forgetting about it and leave it to me to finally remember, and he's not even here to enjoy it. He says of this track, this was really the first Western shooter. The story was straight out of a spaghetti Western. The composer, and I'm going to butcher this guy's name, Clint. I'll just go with that. I know that one. Bahakian? Clint Bahakian really channeled the feel of Morricone when he did this track. It's the track from Outlaws, from the LucasArts game Outlaws. As requested by Matt, that is music from the LucasArts game Outlaws. I guess the title track, Outlaws. I'm a big fan of the Western stuff, and it was a fantastic job that the composer did for that. His next request is going to be the oldest of the tracks that we play on this episode. It is from Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link. Now, he says he knows that everyone loves the main theme from Zelda, and of course we've heard that many, 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 many times in many different ways as well. But this one's opening really reminds him of trying so hard to beat the game as a kid. Here is the title theme from Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link. What's interesting about that track, it's from Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link. We were talking with Gareth about doing sequels, and this is a sequel to Zelda. There is no sense of that theme.
Yeah.
It sounds like there's a variation to it a little bit, but I can't play the two side by side and you hear both. You're going to hear, I mean, it's 8-bit stuff you're dealing with, so, you know, they kind of have to, the sounds are going to sound the same, but it is not the same melody at all. There is not even a hint of the melody in there whatsoever. So it's very strange this is Zelda, for God's sakes, you know? And every Zelda game that we've had from probably 64 on, maybe even SNES as well, I don't know, I'd have to go back, but seems to have used some variation of the theme of the main melody. It's in there somewhere.
Yeah.
Nothing like that here for the very first sequel of Legend of Zelda. It's very interesting when I listen to that track. So his next request, I weren't sure he'd sent in 4, and I wasn't sure we were going to get to these next 2, but I am determined to get everybody's in there. His next request comes from Deus Ex, and by the way, this is the first one from way back when, not Deus Ex Human Revolution or anything like that. He says
he still lives in the past.
Exactly. Yeah, I know. Trust me, it doesn't get any more modern either for his other one after this. He says it sums up the feel of the future in the game. However, I think he picked it just so he could enjoy my attempt to pronounce it. From Deus Ex, this is Duclair Chateau. That's what it's called. I don't know. It's from the Paris part of the game, I guess. Was music from the very first Deus Ex. I know that when I post this on YouTube, we're going to get flagged beyond belief for all the music that we're using. I don't care. We don't monetize our YouTube videos anyway, specifically because of the music that we use in this. Now, I'm going to skip his last one because we are running short on time. I will try and come back to it if we do have time for that, but I've saved mine for last because, whatever, we didn't have time. I can always put these in our bumper cuts for future episodes, but going all the way back to the beginning with our interview when we spoke with Gareth Coker, he brought up Jesper Kid's wonderful score for Assassin's Creed 2. Now, the whole thing is beautiful, and I love it, but my single favorite of all the tracks is actually the very second track on the soundtrack. So his was track number 1 called Earth, and mine is the second track. This is Venice Rooftops from Assassin's Creed 2. We are running short on time, so I'm trying to get through these as I can. I don't like to interrupt music like this. Normally, we'd have done the whole show without any breaks whatsoever, but we're going to replay this show the weekend, Labor Day weekend, while I'll be in Seattle for PAX. So I have to have the breaks in there. So I do apologize about some of these songs that we're cutting off so soon. The next track that I have chosen goes back to the SNES days, the Super Nintendo days. And with this next track, I want you to try something with it. Now, I'm going to tell you what it is, what game it's from, but I want you to listen to it in a different way. Try not to think of the game that it belongs to and the imagery that comes with that. The track for this has a very suspenseful, almost 80s horror element to it, if you think about it in that way. You can't associate the game that it comes from, otherwise it loses all of that. It never felt that way as it's used in the game, not once. But when I was listening back to it the other night for the show, I just noticed that there's a very Stranger Things type of vibe going on with it, and a little bit of suspense horror that kind of made it stand apart from the game that it belonged to. So give it a shot. It may not work, but it did for me. From all things, from Donkey Kong Country. I know, right? This is a track called Northern Hemispheres. Give it a try. has a very John Carpenter, Halloweenish type sound.
Yeah, I was just thinking I would not want this playing
Right?
when I'm in the house alone, especially if I was about to take a shower or something.
Except I used to listen to this in my house all the time. I used to do the entire soundtrack all the time. I love the soundtrack to Donkey Kong Country, but it wasn't until last night that I started hearing these elements of horror in it. I was like, there's nowhere in this game does it have that.
Yeah.
So that was really, really interesting to hear. Now, we are running very short on time. And we're almost done here with the show. So I want to thank everybody. I want to thank Gareth for being on the show. I want to thank Sarah for being here, coming all the way down and being on the show. It's still doing the horror thing in the back. Thank you to Jason Graves for the interview there. And thank you to all of you who keep listening to the show and sending all the tracks, Chris and Bill. Thanks, everybody, for joining us in the chat room, as well as everyone listening on the stream and on the radio. Thanks to everybody who grabs us each week from iTunes or however you get our show for later use. We really appreciate it. Go to ingamechat.net. You can join us on Twitter, Facebook, our forums at colonyofgamers.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. You're watching us on Twitch. Subscribe there. If you're on Steam, join our Steam group. PS4, we have a community there. Also on Xbox, we have a community there that you can play games with us and other listeners over there. So the 2 songs we did not get to, well, 3 songs. I dropped one of the songs from the Greek mythology that Gareth had written. Matt's other request was Final Fantasy Tactics opening song, which again, stuck in the past. Mine, of course, that doesn't say anything about me because my song that I dropped was from Myst 3, Exile, which I might put those 2 in next week. But anyway, we're going to end the show on... Where's my track for... There it is. Okay. So, as we go out, enjoy this song. You've heard it before.
Well, that's a change.
We did a whole episode. I don't know if you remember this. We did a whole episode where we played all the different versions of the song from all the Super Mario Brothers that ever existed.
On the bright side, I feel a lot less likely I'm going to get murdered on my way home.
Yeah, that's always good. There. Yeah, I actually didn't include that. I actually included the end of Super Mario World. So it's not going to have enough time to play it. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next Saturday.